All right, welcome everybody. Nice to see you. You've got quite a lot of people here. So hopefully you've all got lots of questions, which is the reason to be here. Now, Rajeshree's not here yet, but I gather from Michelle that she will be joining us.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yes. So that's she's very busy making a transition right now. She actually has a studio. I don't know if you know that, you guys, that Rajeshri and her children, grown-up children, Bikram teachers, Anurag and Laju, have a studio in Encino,
Yeah,
which you can go and take their
cool.
classes, which is a good resource. All right, so actually we're going to kick it off because Terry, you gave us some questions. We're going to kick it off by addressing the substance of one of yours, which is what is the correct technique to do pranayama breathing, which I think is always an interesting question, right? It comes up a lot. Largely, I'm going to go from Bikram's dialogue, which I'm actually going to read the introduction for it because it's very interesting, and this is how my teacher teaches it. And there you can find his recording on YouTube, how he begins a class. He begins exactly this way. So this is the instructions how to do, and then all the rest of it, what comes after as you do it, is the corrections. Inhale by the nose and exhale by the mouth. Inhale and exhale should be through the throat. Breathe as much as possible, as long as possible, as slow as possible. Breathe in by the nose and out the mouth, but all the time through the throat. The nose and mouth are only passageway. Bikram will always say that, and that's the basic instruction. So you have to activate the throat to do this. And the slowness for a beginner, my teacher does 6 counts. For a beginner, that seems interminable. For a person who's practiced, it gives you enough time, if you're really working, to fill up your lungs and to empty the lungs. So what he does is, when he teaches this, especially those beginners in the room, he starts this with these words. Please listen carefully. Inhale by the nose. Exhale by the mouth. All the time through the throat. So 6 counts. Often he gives instructions. So there are different instructions. One of the things he's very, very hot on, because it's very important, is move the arms and head together. So there are a number of aspects to this. One is that by moving the arms and head together, you have to concentrate, because some people find it very difficult, but you're trying to develop not just the lung capacity for this, but your concentration power. So in order to move them together, you have to focus on what you're doing and take it away from all the things that might be distracting you. That's one side. There's the physical side. The arms and head moving together help you open up the chest. They actually mimic the movement, the opening of the chest and the lungs, the closing down of the chest and the lungs. So they help you with that, especially as a beginner. It's quite possible as an experienced person to do this without moving arms and head at all. You can just stand still. And you would have more control over the lungs by yourself without the aid there. And then finally, when some people especially, they do a bit too much, move the arms and head separately, they can lift up the shoulders and create pain in the shoulders, or they can push their heads back too much, cranking the neck back. So if I can demonstrate one of them, which I don't really want to do, but it's like, so if I exhale, so I'm on my inhale, and I exhale, and I bent my head back, and my elbows have done nothing, and now look at me, I'm going to,
Yeah.
very unpleasant. Okay, so if I move them together, then I don't get that effect. I actually get a nice, almost like a therapy to those areas rather than the opposite. So something that comes up with teachers sometimes is whether or not to make this continuous. So I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. This is the other thing that you can hear my teacher when you listen, go to one of his classes or record, and it's in our dialogue. When he counts, so when he's giving you the count, this is how he does. Inhale, head down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. Exhale, head up. Slowly push your head back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold it. So whenever he counts, he will always say that. When he's not counting, that is assumed in the words that are being used. So there's a number of different instructions which eyes open, look back, push the hands on the chin, spine straight, only arms and head move. Similar principle, only arms and head move, so no back bending. Again, that prevents you from breathing well. It also puts pressure on areas you don't want pressure. So that's effectively it. But, and it takes some time to master, because he talks about in the blue book, which I thought was funny. I've never heard him say this, but that when you first start, you might make a sound. I think he says like a crowd of piglets rushing to their mother. So you have to learn to use your throat, and you start going, and that does happen. You hear it in the room sometimes, and that's all right. As a beginner, that's all right, because you're actually learning to use the throat. That's the technique. All the rest of it is corrections to achieve the technique. That's his dialogue. That's how he teaches it. And that is, I do that regularly, and I get great benefits from it. And I've become, over time, it's taken me a long time to get adept at it. He used to be at me, because I would be one of those to collapse. He used to be chest up, sweet up, and I would do it. And now I just naturally do it because I've learned. Anything from either of you?
Well, I think the two things I think that are easy to lose sight of. So, the teacher's giving you the pace of the breathing. But I think two things that can get a little lost in the mix, which are really important. One is the knuckles against the chin. That tension of your knuckles against your chin is activating your shoulders, which is giving you access to your spine and your rib cage. So if you just have your hands just touching your chin and no pressure there, then you don't have the leverage, you don't have the muscular connection. You're learning how to access all of the muscles of your rib cage and the diaphragm as well. Now, as Sarah said, when you've done this many years and you're really good at it, you could do it without that extra leverage. But in the beginning, it's really important to discover your connection to those muscles. And the other one is the throat. There is a constriction of the throat. So when you hear Bikram demonstrate it, and as Sarah demonstrated, that constriction of the throat on the inhale and the exhale is a form of resistance breathing. So in the deep breathing, you're not only learning how to breathe deeply, but you're also making it an effort to breathe deeply. And that effort is strengthening the lungs, and it's strengthening all the muscles around the rib cage and the diaphragm and so on. So that those two, I think, those are more subtle aspects of the breathing, but they're really important to work on.
Michelle?
Yeah, it's a great thing to talk about. Terry, I know you brought up the questions, a lot of things about it, but pranayama, standing deep breathing, is so unique in how Bikram does it. Right. I mean, and you can see people in the class. I'm just adding to what the two of you have stated. Right. You see sometimes people, when they bring their elbows up, this is about it. Right. So it's just a practice over time, because, everything is so tight. Most of the time we're doing shallow breathing. We're not even using, the lung capacity that we have. Right. And it's the first thing that we do to warm up the body, right, to get into the spine. Even Rajeshri will say, if you don't do good pranayamas, then likely, you might cramp. Right. You got to have that ability to have that expansion in your lungs and pull in the oxygen. So it does take a while, right, to really practice and stretch those intercostal muscles, the expansion, of the lungs. Right. The elbows come up, you come up out of the waist. You want to fill the lungs. They go to the shoulders, and you want to hold it. I mean, you want to hold that prana in and then exhale very slowly all of the air out. Right. And then you inhale more each time. Right. It's a fascinating breathing technique, right?
Yeah.
That we have in our Bikram yoga practice. And you guys, that kicks in. Remember how Bikram yoga is so simple, because it's just creating this rich blood that we get through the entire body. That's all we're doing, is we're aiding in circulation in the entire body. So we have to create, right, this rich blood through the pranayama deep breathing, right? That helps us for the rest of class.
Yeah.
So it's a subject that we could spend all 90 minutes on, quite honestly, right? I mean,
it's also, I think, important, one thing to really just underscore, if it's not entirely obvious, because I think sometimes it isn't, is that this is not a breathing where you fill your lungs to your default maximum. Like, you just, like, that's me just taking an inhale. it's not that kind of inhale, because we do that every day. We do that all the time, and we're actually only using a small percentage of our lungs when we do that. It's to inhale to the point of resistance where your chest is resisting the expansion, and keep inhaling to balloon the chest, to open up the gaps in the rib cage, the intercostal muscles starting to open up, to really get that full capacity of the lung. So if you're not pushing into the place where it's difficult to inhale, you're not really doing deep breathing, you're just doing standing breathing. And so that's, and it's a bit of a journey. And so that's where the arms, the leverage of the knuckles on the chin and the lifting the arms up is to help you in that journey to really start to tap in 100% of your breathing capacity. And that's when it becomes very impactful. And also sometimes you can get a little dizzy when you're doing it, especially as a beginner, because suddenly you're overwhelmed with the amount of oxygen that's surging into the body.
It says in the
But
dialogue.
it's also like anything, it's something that takes a long time to practice, and it's not a straight line of getting better and better. It's a squirrely, like country lane, as you navigate your way around learning and developing your capacity to breathe deeply.
One thing, just for anyone else who's watching who doesn't understand, because I do encounter it, and Bikram talks about it quite a lot in the room with the beginners, and when he writes, breathing in through the nose using the throat. So it's not, you are using the nose. The nose is the passageway. The air's coming in through the nose, but you're using the throat to achieve this. So it's not sniffing. So if you find yourself ever going, nothing's really coming in the lungs. It's quite minimal. It only goes to that minor place of resistance, the default. Plus, I make myself feel very dizzy without purpose. You make yourself feel dizzy if you can take enough oxygen right at the end. He wants you to do that. But so I'll read again exactly. Inhale by the nose and exhale by the mouth. Inhale and exhale should be through the throat. So always activating that throat.
Yeah, Leanne had a follow-up question related to this. Leanne.
Yes. So, so I noticed that when I'm inhaling, it's slow and controlled, right? So I'm able to inhale to like, I guess the most potential that I can. But what I struggle with is the exhale. I always happen to take longer than I should, but I still try to make it slow and controlled, but I still take too long. So I'm not controlling it to the right pace. Is that correct?
No, not exactly. It's actually, I think many people have that experience.
Yeah.
I think that you can most people can exhale for longer, especially in the beginning, than they can inhale. And even so, it takes a lot of conscious effort to get all the air out, even a little bit more than it takes to get all the air in. So there's nothing wrong. And it's a really good thing to bring up, because, and I think it happens to a lot of people, that the exhale is longer. But Bikram asks for the same amount. So then that would be something to think about over time without obsessing. How do you really get that concentration? But nothing wrong.
Yeah. It's also, reality that when you take many teachers' classes, the precise timing of the 6 count in and hold it is not identical. It's in the ballpark, but it's not absolutely identical. And it isn't for Bikram either. Even from one day to the next, if Bikram's excited, he might teach a slightly faster deep breathing. If he's wanting to emphasize something, he might teach a slightly slower deep breathing. And so, the message when sometimes, especially teachers who are students, often say, "Oh, I didn't like that. Your breathing was too slow or too fast." I've heard Bikram and other senior teachers say, "Well, it's your job to stay in tune with the movement." So for me, I too, Leanne, sometimes I find that I would much rather have a count of 8 to do my exhale. Like, I would really like that extra last little bit to get the last little bit out. And so then the first couple of breaths at the beginning, I have to tune myself and speed up my exhale a little bit so that it stays in sync with the rhythm of the instruction. And that's perfectly normal, and it's perfectly normal that there is a little bit of variance, and that you just accept that that's just you calibrating to the beat that's right there. Just like music can be played, the same piece of music can be played to slightly different tempos, and it's still the same music, and it's still wonderful. So the deep breathing, we teach it in a 6 honest counts breathing, but you can go on YouTube and you can find like BKS Iyengar, a very famous yogi, who demonstrates this style of deep breathing where he stays on stage and he gets the microphone and he starts to inhale. And he keeps inhaling 45 seconds, one inhale, and his chest looks massive, like it's going to explode, like an old boiler from a 1920s film. And then he slowly exhales for 45 seconds. So there's not a magic to the timing, but rather Bikram has identified that the kind of pace that we run at in the class, a 6 honest count breathing, is a very effective and accessible pace of breathing for a beginner. But certainly more advanced, dedicated practitioners of pranayama might do it for much, much longer periods of time outside of the context of a Bikram class.
All right, anybody else want to comment on that one or ask more questions or introduce a new question?
Michael put in one. Michael, do you want to tell us about your wind removing question?
Yeah, yeah, but before I do that, with pranayama, when I teach and then I record and listen back, I feel like I'm a little slower than I'd like to be with the pace for pranayama. So any tips there, like maybe just starting the count in one of the earlier sets, for example?
You can certainly do that. I mean, sometimes I'll start the class, maybe my first or second breath, with a count if I think that the room is like all over the place, like it's not concentrating, or whatever kind of influence, because it brings everybody into a strict counting. But honestly, I would say listen to Bikram's recording a few times and listen to him how he counts, because it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's not 1, 2. There's a middle ground to it which has a nice evenness to it, and so if you can start to absorb the evenness of that pace, and you start to see that you're neither lagging nor lurching forward, and it's that middle ground where you're just steadily instructing the breathing, and that's pretty much the timing that Bikram teaches.
Okay. Yeah, so I had a couple of questions.
Oh, hang on, Michael. Terry,
Yeah.
looked like you.
Oh, yeah,
Do you
go
have a
ahead.
follow-up, Terry? Because it was your original question that prompted us.
Yeah, my question was directed not so much at the methodology or the synchronization of the movements, but my reading of the book, the blue book, Bikram's Beginning Class, he makes reference to counts in virtually every posture. And those counts are always tagged with a follow-up or frequently tagged with a follow-up or a similar statement that a count is equal to a second. All my question was directed to is in the standing deep breathing, is the synchronization keyed to 6 seconds? 6 counts equals 6 seconds. And Bikram's book, he goes to great lengths, and I think pretty clearly, about holding a posture for a specific period of time. And he directs students to do it exactly. And my question is, there is a considerable variation between instructors. So when Bikram says, do it for 6 honest counts or 6 seconds or 20, whatever it is, isn't that what we're supposed to be striving for? Or do we just go with whatever an individual instructor feels is appropriate at that time? That's question one. And the second part of that question is, Bikram says, do it for 10 counts or 10 cycles. Invariably, it is not 10 cycles. More often than not, it's 8 cycles. I'm just trying to find out what's the guide that dictates an instructor's articulation of what you're supposed to do in class. Is it the blue book? Is it what Bikram wrote in the blue book? Or is it something else that Bikram wrote later on? Michelle today in class said the instructor dialogue took 9 years to write. Bikram's books have been around longer than 9 years. And he's pretty explicit in telling, at least as I read it, saying what he says in the blue book is the way to do it. And if you want the medical benefit of a posture, you do it the way he says to do it and do it exactly. Now, obviously, I'm a beginner. I can't do them. But I'd like a clear guideline on what it is that I'm striving for or have as a goal. So right now, I have as a goal what Bikram writes in his blue book and follows with his orange book. And I can't do it. I understand that. But hopefully, at some point, I want to be able to do it a little more competently than I can do it now. I just need a little guidance. Where's the clarity? Where's when the instructor's dialogue differs from what Bikram says, as I understand what he says.
You know, Terry, I'm going to stop you there, okay? Because I think this is enough information. I'm not directly giving you an answer. I'd like to give you some information. These are great questions. So when I said 9 years, it took him 9 years to put this sequence together. 1956 to 1964. Is that right? I think that's right. 56 to 64. So yes, there are the books, but in terms of what made this newer was the ability to make this a class. And that class required a dialogue. The books are great when you have your own practice, and they're so informational. I learn a lot from them. But the dialogue is specifically, Bikram signed this dialogue, and that's what he said the teachers need to teach by. If you think about it, he's taught, according to Laju in the podcast, 17,000 teachers. So he needed one thing that he was able to set up so that he could have some assurance that the teachers were able to deliver this the way in which that he sees it being taught. So our allegiance is to that dialogue. So that is something we work on all the time, right? As teachers, is how do we deliver this dialogue the best way? You're right, there are variations, and we try to bring it in closer. But again, this isn't something that's new to Bikram. He knows that. So how close can we keep getting to the dialogue? We go back to it over and over again, have it on my phone. In terms of the timing of each of the postures, and I shared this with you before, and this is an interesting question for everybody here. I remember at my teacher training, fall of 2001, people wanted that information too. And Bikram gave some guidelines on that, but he didn't want you to be so hung up on it because he knows that you would be too fixated on the timing. He wanted you to be fixated on the delivery of the dialogue the right way. If you say the dialogue the right way, in the words that are given there, it keeps the student in the posture long enough. The good news is that it's 90 minutes, right? So we know that if it's 100 minutes long, something's wrong, right? If it's 85 minutes long, something is wrong. It's 90 minutes, and you got to fix, those 26 postures, 2 breathing exercises in there, right? And then each one has, a certain pace. And you guys, the dialogue should be like this, right? Keeping you in that meditative state. So that's the delivery of the commands, and then he's got some descriptions in it to hold you in the asana, breathing normal. So again, I know, Terry, I'm not giving like a specific answer to your question, but I do want you to know that, the books are great. They're full of knowledge, but our commitment is to the dialogue. So if we're going to talk to something, it has to be, we're able to teach the class. Bikram wants you to teach his class to his students. He knows that he can trust me trust Michael, trust Sarah, trust Matt, that we're delivering his yoga this way through his dialogue. Yeah. Anybody want to, add to that, right? And so that's, we're trying to understand it and also get better at it, right? Too. But in terms of the 9 years, yeah, it took them 9 years to put this sequence together.
And also, there's a generational distinction, a purpose distinction between the Blue Book and the dialogue. They're not in any way in conflict at all. We routinely study the Blue Book as much as we do the dialogue and the Orange Book, for that matter. There's no conflict between them, even when there appears to be some difference. They're just often different ways of kind of approaching it. So, the Blue Book was written at a time where there were only a couple of studios. There was a studio in LA, there was a studio in San Francisco, and I think there was one other studio perhaps in Hawaii, somewhere else.
Yeah.
And there were actually no other studios anywhere in the country. And so that book was written, it was originally a red covered book, and it was written in conjunction with one of Bikram's students to try and get the word out to people with pictures and instruction on how they could practice at home on their own, where they have no teacher looking at them, and they do the best that they can. And so some very simple guidelines, like some simple, 10 honest counts, things like that, were given to help people understand how to execute the posture with some degree of success. Years later, the dialogue was created in the mid-90s. By 97, it was in a good draft. And that was designed as a detailed many-page document for teachers to learn how to instruct entire classes of students, where all the students might be at different levels of ability and physical capability, as well as how long they've been practicing, and to give a good general class that would work for everybody standing in the room. So there's no real conflict. And it is very interesting when Bikram is confronted with direct, targeted, specific questions, like you're asking, Terry, during teacher training. He will pause and he'll listen to the question, and he'll often typically respond in part by saying, and I'm going to paraphrase him, but he would say, "You're focusing on the wrong detail." When somebody asks him, is it 10 seconds, is it 15 seconds, he might say, "You're focusing on the wrong detail. Make it 10 honest seconds. If it's 15, if it's 20, that's fine." He would say, "You focus on how to do the posture the right way, you try the right way. The timing is a generalization that obviously typically when we say 10 seconds, we don't mean 3 seconds. It's come into the posture, be there longer." If you were at home practicing on your own, you might, and you've been practicing Bikram for many, many years, you might deliberately do a master class. You might do a class where you deliberately held all of the postures a little bit longer than usual, because that's where you're at in your practice and you're interested in exploring what that would be like. And that would be fine. You'd still be doing the yoga. So, there really isn't a conflict here. It's just more important that we understand the general purpose and the execution of the posture, and trust the process of the dialogue will guide the entire class through the process without problem.
All right, as a conclusion, is there, I've bought the books, I've read the books, I've asked on various occasions, where do I get a copy of the dialogue, right? Each time the response I get is, I can pay the $10,000 or whatever it is to go to the
That's how
teacher
you get it.
training.
Yes.
And that's fine.
True.
I understand the concept of copyright. I understand that. But the only written word I've got are these two books.
There is, Terry, you can hear Bikram
wait just a moment, please. Can somebody point me in the right direction to go to find Bikram's written word rather than a teacher's interpretation of that written word? Can I read it?
But what would that do, Terry? Wouldn't that put you down a rabbit hole too? Like what would that do?
It might help me find a balance between what I read in the book and what I hear in the class. And if I understand the basis for that dialogue, then I understand why my reading of the book is different than the dialogue that I hear in the class.
Have you guys ever taken Bikram's class? His newer CD, his newest one? You ever
That's it.
taken?
That's the best source.
Have you ever taken
hear
that
him
class,
say.
Terry? Leanne, that would be Jeff, you have, I know. Angie and Joel, have you guys ever taken?
The only classes I've ever taken are
Yeah.
either at Bomitra Yoga in Mountain View or Bikram Yoga San Jose. I haven't taken any other classes
You know,
anywhere.
You know what would be great is if, did we say, Matt and Sarah, is it still
We-
available on YouTube?
It is. We need to
It is.
double check the details, but we
Yeah.
can send the link out
Yes,
to everybody
it's
who's here
publicly
today.
available.
It is publicly available.
You can hear him teach. It's
I
wonderful
think that would be
experience.
really beneficial, Terry, and all of you, if you haven't, as a good next step, Terry, take his class. You know, it used to be, remember you guys, I'm old school. It was on the I have it somewhere up in my shelf. It was 2 CDs, right? And I know we have it, but yeah, if you could do that, Matt, why don't you send it out to everybody?
Yeah.
I'd appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, all
It's
right,
very good class. You feel as though he's in the room with you.
right,
You've
you
really
do.
worked. Don't worry about that. It's like
You do. You will
Yeah.
feel, yeah, don't worry. You won't be bored at all. You'll feel like he's watching you, even though it's pretty remarkable. So yeah. And you're making me want to take it. It's been a minute since I've taken it too. So we should do that, you know, as a teaching group, is take that class. That class again. So let's move on to other questions and go maybe go back to that. But Terry, let Matt, if you can do that, I'm just
Yeah, we'll do.
do
Absolutely.
the link on the and you guys all take that class. Yeah, that's your homework. So next month you got to all come back and tell us your thoughts on taking Bikram's class. Yeah.
all right, Michael, do you want to go ahead with one of your questions?
Okay. Yeah, and so for that dialogue, I'm wondering, I have one called Bikram Yoga Spoken Instruction. I don't know. I think there are several things out there.
No,
This-
Bikram's beginning yoga class
Yeah.
with Bikram in it.
That's the title.
But you had a question about wind ruin, didn't you?
Yeah. So you know, just in general, I have my hip joints seem very tight. So doing a forward bend is difficult, and that coupled with lower back stiffness comes up in a couple of postures like Padahastasana, hard to get stomach to thighs, chest to knees. Today in class, I was thinking about it. In wind removing two legs, I can either really grab my elbows, but to do so, I have to lift my body up. So my upper body's up off the floor. And then I can't really get back down fully. So I can do that, or I can just sort of grab my wrists, still get a bit of a nice tight grip, but then I can get my head on the floor, start getting my chin down. So I'm looking at that posture like there's two approaches, and which is maybe best for me for improving.
May I give this one to myself to start with? Because I think a lot about this one.
Great
So
question.
I'm just going to give this, and you'll get everybody's take, and anyone else can join in as well. But just to put it in a context, that Bikram's teacher, Vishnu Ghosh, said this wonderful thing that if you even think about trying the posture the right way, immediately the cells will start to go in that direction, all right? So, more important, you're always trying to do the posture to the best of your ability. There isn't a requirement that you execute it how the words say. There's a requirement to try to execute it how the words say. So what does he say? You know, he says shoulders relaxed on the floor. He says both legs lift up. He doesn't say anything. He says one thing that gets in the way, and it probably isn't you, because you know better, but one thing that gets in the way is people trying to shove their hips on the floor, because somewhere later in the future it says eventually the spine will be flat. That's a result. So you can lift the legs up a lot, and that might help you. And if it doesn't, that's all right. Once you've got to that point, maybe you weren't lifting the legs, you've lifted the legs up. I say grab your elbows each other. I would say grab your elbows. If you can't grab your elbows, you literally can't. Not you don't want to, you don't like it. If you literally can't, then naturally you can't. But you still practice in the context you're thinking about immediately putting the mind in the space of grabbing the elbows. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the first I know how important it is to go step by step with posture. So yes, the first priority is grabbing the elbows. I mean,
But
that's
no, my point is this: that if you try, so you put your whole attention and focus
yeah.
in the fact you're going to grab your elbows, and if you end up here by trying that, that's where you end up. But you
Yeah.
tried to grab your elbows. If you're me, I can grab my elbows. I can grab my forearms. If I end up like that, this is not going to be doing me any good because I can already do it. But if you can't do it yet, still the attention, the intention, and the attention and the concentration has to be on trying to grab your elbows. Then you'll get the benefits that are available to you that day.
Yeah. Also, it's really important with this posture, with wind removing, and it affects everything else that you identified where you have the same problem, which is you're lifting your legs up. You're not using your hands to lift your legs up. You're using your legs to lift your leg up, which means you're using your abdominal structure and all the core muscles within your body. So the more you can try to bring your knees close to your chest before you've even grabbed them, and the more you can try and hug your knees and chest using your leg muscles, your hip muscles, your abdominal muscles, the more you're going to get connected to how to move that part of your body in a more seamless way in all the other postures. Because what you have is you have the muscles, they're in your body, but your brain doesn't yet have a fully fluid relationship to how they all work together. And so in wind removing, the more you can try to bring your knees into just using your leg muscles and then grab your elbows. So your elbows are really there, grabbing the elbows, it's creating effectively a lock. I mean, it's just holding them there so they don't slide away as you work on the process. So the more you can do that, that will help. You will also notice that as you try to do that, your hips will quite naturally lift up off the floor, and you should allow that to happen. Don't try to keep your hips on the floor as you're grabbing your elbows. And so often what happens is that your hips are on the floor, and so what happens is your chest lifts up, your head lifts up, and you've essentially rolled forward towards your waist rather than allowing your waist to roll forward towards your chest, if that makes sense. And so then you end up with that dilemma that your head is way off the ground, and when you try to relax your shoulders and your head, your head drops back, and it feels very odd thing.
Yeah, is it better to just sort of, even though my head's in the air, just try to keep the chin
and so
down?
Well, Bikram would tell you to keep your head, I mean, even if your head goes back, right? You're starting to look down, and eventually your head will go down. But I agree. I think often we have to be careful too, because, eventually in the future, as you improve your skeletal joints, bone joints enough, then only, so the hips can be off the floor. I don't know why we think the hips need to be down. Right. So remember, we're trying to create a tourniquet effect. I mean, I'm adding to what you're saying, Matt, right? Like we have to have that pressure, right? You want to hold on to those elbows. You really want to build that pressure. We got the right and the left side, and now the middle transverse part of the colon, right? So, it's natural let the hips come up, right? That don't worry about the hips. Eventually in the future, as you improve your skeletal system, bone joints enough, then only total spine is going to lay flat on the floor. I think sometimes we say that and all of a sudden everybody thinks that my hips need to be down. Right. And again, right, it's also to a comment that is in the dialogue, right? Holding the asana and stillness, breathing normal, right? And you kind of have a direction where you're going, but it's not today. So yeah, I'm just chiming in. I think that it's a great question. This is a great question. It's a question that I think that a lot of people have actually, Michael. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. So Michael, to that point also, the challenge you have, and you, not you, I mean, many people in a similar situation to you, that when you tuck your chin into your chest and try to relax your shoulders down, if you start to notice that there is a natural desire for the body to connect that to tightening the abdomen and pulling the knees into the chest, you will start to develop that chain of action in the body. So that instruction, chin to the chest, shoulders relaxed on the floor, isn't an instruction that's like, it's not about what it looks like. It's about what's happening when you're trying to do that. And what you're happening is not just about the neck and the shoulders. It's about the entire spine, in through the abdominal muscles, into the hip flexors that bring the knees into the chest, which helps with the whole process. And the eventual outcome of that entire process is that, yes, the spine is flat on the floor, but it is a process. And so each piece has a purpose, has a value to work on. But yeah, don't be afraid if the hips come off the floor. as a beginner. It might take many, many years before eventually your spine is flat on the floor.
If
That's
I just
quite
read
normal.
the first few lines also, if you look at the order of it, immediately both legs up. So you're concentrating in the present when you're doing it. Immediately both legs up. You try to do that. Grab the elbows each other over the legs, a couple of inches below the knees if possible. Nice and tight grip, compact. So again, you try to grab the elbows. Feet together, side by side, relaxed position. Then it says chin down, neck flat on the floor. Now it's nice if you can keep them down, but there's not an instruction you have to keep them plastered down there. You can bring them down there. It's a correction, right? Oh, you had them up, bring them down. It's fine. Shoulders relaxed. That's the correction. They were like this, relaxed. You try to relax them. They don't relax. You try. So that's the order of it. If you go specifically with the order, and don't worry about getting it right, but think about trying it the right way. Then what happens?
I think I was thinking of the end result of getting the spine flat on the floor, which I can kind of do if I'm grabbing elbows.
But don't try to get it. It doesn't say try. It says eventually in the future. You keep practicing the whole class, including this posture. Eventually, when you're in this posture, the spine will be flat on the floor. No actions at all.
You know, when Rajashri teaches this one, she does say that this really helps the low back. Like, she does say that. She says it a lot, actually. So I think sometimes we translate, oh, I've got to do something, right? I've got to do something then, right? It kind of triggers that, oh, I've got to help my lower spine go down, right? When she says things like that. So I can see why we pick that up. But just by nature of doing it the right way, you know, eventually in the future. Yeah, that's one I've had to relearn a lot myself too. So good question.
Good question. Terry, would you like to ask one of your other questions?
Sure, I have submitted them. One that I'm not sure how to do it correctly, but again, the only thing I have to rely on are the books. Bikram talks about the history of Hatha Yoga with 3 principles in Hatha Yoga, one of which deals with breathing. And he describes 2 mechanisms for breathing that apply to different postures. And he makes the reference to 80-20 breathing. And Sarah, you're the only instructor that I have, and again, I haven't done this all that long. I've been doing it for 5 years, plus or minus. You're the only instructor I have heard use the term 80-20 breathing. And that was about 3 weeks ago when I took a class from you. And it was just a passing comment. I guess my question is, if Bikram in the books talks about 80-20 breathing, about 2 methods of breathing for different postures, isn't that what I'm supposed to be doing? Or am I supposed to be normal breathing, which he also defines in the book as being whatever the 80-20 breathing or the exhalation breathing is for a given posture? I don't know which breathing mechanism to strive to do, but apparently, at least my understanding of the instructor dialogue is 80-20 breathing doesn't have to do with anything.
I'm going to give this
so what
to
do I do?
Terry.
Do I do 80-20 breathing, or do I do?
So this was one I particularly looked into, Terry, just to make sure I could give you a thorough answer. So, you know, there are a variety of references to breathing that you encounter with Bikram Yoga. 80-20 breathing we talk about from time to time, and it's mentioned in the books. You will also hear us say inhale breathing, or exhale breathing, or normal breathing, and sometimes take a deep breath. And sometimes there are no specific breathing cues at all in different postures. Now, 80-20 breathing is a phrase that Bikram uses in his books. There are 2 variations of 80-20 breathing. Depending on the kind of posture you're doing, there's fill your lungs, inhale breathing, hold 80%, breathe up and down in the top 20% of the lungs. So that's inhale breathing. That's an 80-20 inhale breathing. And so you take a deep breath, which is also another cue that means inhale breathing. Take a deep breath, fill your structure, your rib cage with air, fill it with air, keep it full, but just breathing in and out just 20%. So your chest stays full of air whilst you do the posture. So for instance, when we do the full locust, the aeroplane where we lift up, you need to fill the body with expansive energy. So you fill the lungs up, you hold them full, and you just breathe a little in and out whilst keeping the lungs mostly full. So that's inhale breathing, or inhale 80-20 breathing, or it's also cued in the dialogue sometimes as take a deep breath, depending on what the posture is. And then the other variation to that is the kind of exact opposite to that, which is exhale breathing. So in exhale breathing, typically done in compressive postures where you have vacated the abdomen and you're about to do a forward deep compression, you exhale all the air out of the lungs, and then you hold the lungs to be mostly empty and just breathe in and out 20% whilst keeping the lungs largely empty. And so again, it's more when you've compressed, you've shrunk the torso because you're rounding in like in a rabbit, or standing separate leg head to knee, or some posture like that. So those are just different words for what you've read about with 80-20 breathing that in dialogue are cued as inhale breathing or exhale breathing. And obviously exhale breathing is always accompanied by holding the stomach in. And take a deep breath is just another way to say inhale breathing. And so you'll see it, most of the postures have one or other. Some of the postures have both cues in them at different phases, like camel has both inhale breathing, push your hips forward, and then you go back into it, and then there's exhale breathing at the end. And so it depends on what you're doing. But if you can think of it like, basically, are you trying to make yourself big, or are you trying to make yourself small? And depending on the posture, if you're trying to make yourself big, it's typically an inhale breathing type posture. And if you're trying to make yourself small, it's typically an exhale breathing. That's a simplification, but it's a good way to kind of be related to it. And so even if you never heard these cues and didn't know this was true, if you practiced each of those postures enough, your body would naturally gravitate in those directions anyway, because we kind of do that. Like, if you're about to push a car that's stuck in the mud, you tend to take a deep breath and go, and push. And so you're kind of doing it quite naturally, even though you weren't told to do it that way, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay.
I think his description in the book pretty much describes the two types of breathing and assigns breathing, whatever breathing it is, to a particular posture, and he calls that normal for the posture.
Yes, there is. Yes, normal breathing for the posture.
I understand the concepts of inhale breathing and exhale breathing.
Yeah. So again, with the dialogue, Terry, I mean, it relates to even your last question too. The way he's taught his teachers to teach his students is a very simple dialogue. So a lot of the words and what he's saying in there, why he wants you to say them, is because he knows that there's a concept of 80-20 breathing he wants the students to have. So in the dialogue, he's got inhale and exhale, take a deep breath, right? All those things in there so that he knows that the student is getting the 80-20. It's the same as the description, so that he knows that, okay, they're holding their asana long enough in the posture, right? This is Bikram's beginning yoga class, right? That's why he's got this dialogue, so that he knows, right, that through this dialogue that his students are getting what he knows is the right way, the 80-20, all those concepts are built into the simplicity of how he's built the dialogue. Right. That's a good insight. I mean, a lot of people talk about bandhas, right? Like, because other forms of, well, the locks, right, in the body. Well, if we're teaching the yoga the right way, you're getting, work on your bandhas if you really want to start talking about other forms of yoga. I mean, he's made it. It's why it's so brilliant. He's made it. It's in the dialogue. It's in the dialogue. So, it doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean, right, that we're always getting it the right way, but the breathing cues in the dialogue are very important. So, it's helping you get what you need, 80-20 wise, or whatever he feels the breathing needs to be in that posture, those breathing cues. I mean, and good point. You know, we have the breathing cues are something we have to, you know, Tibby, Michael, or you guys know, we always have to have those in the right place. And we study those. I mean, yeah, Camel has 4. So.
May I just speak about normal breathing very quickly? Bikram has a nice thing. He says normal breathing we often say in by the nose, out by the in and out by the nose, which is normal breathing. But Bikram has a wonderful way he puts it: close your mouth and don't think about it. But naturally, a body in relaxation, most mammals, a human body in relaxation, the mouth will be closed and the air will be coming in and out through the nose. So close your mouth and don't think about it. So that would be when, you know, exhale, breathing, and then you, at that point, you've done whatever action it is, and the 20% in and out is going to be with the mouth closed, coming in and out through the nose.
Michael had the second question as well.
Yeah, but should we see if Angie has one?
Yeah, and you guys have another?
Angie, you have a question?
Claire, Tibby, have one? Jeff?
I actually do have a question. I've been teaching again recently, and I would love for you all to talk a little bit about don't pull on bent knees. And, you know, there's 2 places, or no pulling on bent knees, or no, like in standing separate legs, stretching pose, and again in Paschimottanasana, because you see it a lot where people cannot straighten their legs all the way. And I feel like I hear, and, you know, I'm a ballet dancer, you know, I can straighten so I need to understand as a teacher when I see these bodies, how I can help them. So can you speak to don't pull on bent knees a little bit would be great.
I'm going to speak about Paschimottanasana because that's one I know Bikram's answer and I always use it. So the answer to that is it's mechanically impossible to do Paschimottanasana with bent legs. So it's nothing bad or wrong. So the person has to walk their hips back until the knees are locked. And if they can't do it, they just have to keep doing. Because he says in that CD we were talking about, he's obviously talking to someone who's doing this, and he says, boss, you're struggling against yourself. Walk the hips back. So there are different things that any student can't do. For example, forward rounding doesn't come naturally to me. This is something that the mind-body connection hasn't been made yet for some people, and some of it may be contributed by stiffness, which is all of this can change. But when you try to do Paschimottanasana with bent legs, you don't get the desired effect or benefits. So then you keep walking the hips back until the legs are straight. That's that one. It's not that there's nothing totally bad going to happen. It's just not going to work. It's mechanically not possible. So that's the one I have the most thoughts about. Michelle, do you want to talk about one of the others?
Matt, you want to add first?
Yeah, just on Paschimottanasana. So he does say pull as hard as possible at the beginning on the toes. But the point is that the pulling at the beginning of the posture, where you're instructed to grab the big toes using the middle and the index fingers and pull as hard as possible. That point is to create a tension. So now you keep the head up, and that's the other instruction, is keep your head up, please look in the mirror, keep your head up, and then walk your hips back. So you've got tension. So for somebody like Michael, who's struggling in that particular type of movement of the body, keeping the tension in the arms whilst you forcibly try to walk your hips back, whilst keeping your chest up, creates the tension and the connection that eventually the light bulb will go on and the muscles will all connect, and then, you know, it's like a light bulb happens and then suddenly you understand. But it doesn't happen, it could happen at any time. It's not linear. It could happen for a student tomorrow morning, or it could take 10 years. But the process of following the instructions is what's going to cue it. Once they have straightened their legs, if they're just trying to stretch forward with the knees bending, as Sarah said, at that point, any pulling without an attempt to straighten the legs is a waste of time. Your arms and your legs are acting like shock absorbers that soak up all the energy that would otherwise be propelling yourself forward into an extension, into a stretch. And so that's why it's so important to have the legs straight. But obviously at the beginning of the process of getting into the posture, you do grab the big toes and you do pull on them. But the purpose on the pulling is to learn how to straighten the leg. The same when we pull on our toes in standing head to knee or other similar postures or Janu Shavasana. The pulling at that stage is to help you straighten the leg. And that's an important process. It triggers the body's reaction. You pull on the toe or on the ball of the foot in head to knee, and your body will react by trying to push the heel forward and straighten the leg. And so it's a very clever, it's a very simple way to get a very clever reactionary force happening within the body.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a different perspective, Angie, on this, right? I agree with the mechanics and all that. Now, one of the great things about Bikram yoga is you just have to teach it head on, right? And just encourage them with the right instruction to do it the right way and try. I would not use the word don't. Okay? You just need to mean that even today, I'm thinking about class today, there's several people, right? You're still giving the instruction. Their knees are still bent, but they're trying. They're trying. So that's why you have to say the words. They've got to get the grip as the leverage, right? Do all the right things. Make sure they're rolling the weight forward and contracting their thighs to eventually lock the knees. But you keep them in the mindset of moving forward. Saying the word don't, you know what I mean? I'm not saying you say that, but I have heard it before. And sometimes, you got to also trust too, that their body is going to give them a message if they've gone too far, but 9 times out of 10, it's not, right? And Bikram wants you to pull as hard as you can, right? You remember everything is done in sequential order. So you've warmed up enough, right? You need to trust that you're in the heat, that you're doing it, and that you're able to give yourself a millimeter more than what you would otherwise to help you gain that flexibility with the strength you have. That's why you're in there. That's why you're in there. You're in there to get that mobility back, that range of motion back. So it's typical. It's why they're in there. So just keep teaching it the right way, and they start to have their own aha moments. I can visualize many people having an aha moment where all of a sudden, right, they have a little bit more range of motion, right? And their legs start to extend a little bit more and they can get into it a little bit deeper. And then they come back again, right? It's a slow process. But I think it comes from encouragement and making sure you give the commands and the actions the right way. Does that help at all? I mean, along with these, yeah. I mean,
Angie,
go ahead. I'm done. You can add to that.
Angie, I have a question. The people who have the bent knees on the Paschimottanasana on the floor, are they also having trouble locking a knee when they're standing?
Almost always, yeah. Yeah,
okay.
Go hand in hand. Yeah.
That's been my big question and noticing is how to convince people to trust themselves to lock the knee. There seems to be a deep-rooted fear in a lot of people that they're going to harm their knee joint if they're locking it. And someone mentioned to me, well, they often think of it confusingly, like we're telling them to force the knee back, which we're not.
Right.
And I try and emphasize that now, that do not push the knee back gently until it naturally stops and then contract the thigh. That's locking the knee. So I've noticed that too. I think it's just a time thing that people eventually come to it themselves if you say it enough.
Yeah.
Just emphasize it enough and they'll get to it themselves eventually. But I can't explain why some people have this block about it. It's just the way it is. I don't know.
Yeah. So in standing separate leg stretching, for instance, I think that was one of the ones you mentioned, Angie. So standing separate leg stretching when people's knees are bent, there is an important instruction within the dialogue of that posture, which is inherently related to helping them straighten the legs. So they are pulling, obviously they've been instructed to pull, but maybe their knees are bent. And so the instruction is to roll forward, to try to touch your forehead to the floor. So somebody whose knees are bent are not trying to touch their forehead to the floor, and almost always their weight is back in their heels when they're doing that. And the more you bring the weight forward into the toes, it's not lifting the weight out of the heel, it's just bringing the center of gravity further and further forward.
Yeah.
The more and more you do that, the more the body will automatically start to straighten the legs, because it's an inevitability to prevent yourself plowing your head into the floor, to prevent yourself falling over. If you're still committed to going forward, your body will respond by straightening the legs. And so, so for instance, when I couldn't touch my forehead to the floor in teacher training, Bikram got on me in that one posture, and after most of the other people in the room had kind of finished, he said to me, he just kept on yelling at me, pull harder, roll forward, touch the floor, open your legs, pull harder, roll forward, touch the floor with your forehead, pull harder, open your legs, roll. And he did it it felt like a minute, and eventually my head touched the floor, which was amazing because my head was like a good foot off the floor before I started that moment. And I did fall over, actually, as it turns out, and it was funny. I did a forward round and I knocked some water bottles over, and it was all fun and games. But the day after that, I had a completely different relationship to my legs and my hips. It's like something in my brain's programming, something in my brain's relationship to my body had shifted because of a willingness to follow the teacher and just go beyond where I understood what I was doing, beyond any sense of being comfortable in the posture. And so that's the tricky thing, I think, for us, is to encourage our students to go a little bit more than they understand, a little bit more than they're comfortable, because they're not going to get the understanding by staying where their current understanding is. They can only get it by going outside of the parameters of their existing understanding of how to move their body. Otherwise, they're just going to be stuck with what they've got right now.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Jeff, because you guys too, right? And all of us have done tree pose. So, it says, right, when the final parts of tree pose are, right leg locked, thigh contracted, stomach in, spine straight, focus one point, eyes open, breathing normal, right? And you see a lot of people, they have their leg is locked.
Yeah, yes.
So yeah, I mean, there's this whole thing about Bikram yoga, right? The mind-body connection, right? Sometimes we're focused on something else and all of a sudden you've done something else and you didn't know you could do it, right? Like there's, and Bikram says it, he doesn't, when you're taking his class, which you guys will hear, he will just shout out, he'll look at you sometimes and go, you're in fear. He'll say that. Right? You're in fear, right? And it's a process to help the body, but also to help the mind, right? To have these breakthroughs. And to lock the knee is such an overriding theme in in Bikram yoga. So that journey is endless, right? And it's a stiff body, it's a screw loose brain, it's a lost soul. And it shows up in the body. So that's why you just keep working on it every single day. And that's why as a teacher, you got to get out of the way, right? You got to deliver it and just have the student have their process. All
right, we have more questions. Michael definitely has.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have another question? Tibby, do you have a question? You're muted right now.
Sorry.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like, what do you think about in Kapalbhati, the dialogue said, blow through the lips, but I notice many teachers say through the mouth. When I correct the teacher, they say it's the same. For me, it's not the same. It's different.
It's different.
What do you think about?
Say the dialogue. It's correct.
Yes.
The whole dialogue for Kapalbhati is exactly what you should do, and it's perfect. It's how Bikram demonstrates it. It's perfect. It doesn't need changing.
For me, it's the dialogue is perfect. It's different completely. When you blow by the lips or blow by the mouth, it's completely
different. Yes. To demonstrate it if necessary to students who are doing something funny, it's still the lips are sort of, I don't know, you can all tell me because you will do, but the lips are sort of used, but they're not. It's so they're sort of taught so that you're making a place to make it.
Yeah, this is restriction. So in other lineages of yoga, of hatha yoga, this particular pranayama is sometimes taught with lips and sometimes taught through the nose. And so in either case, you can see that it's a very small passageway. You're deliberately
Yeah.
creating a small passageway to force air out using abdominal strength, abdominal action. And so so it's very different. Lips versus mouth is quite a different thing. Ha ha ha. It would be a completely different way to breathe than.
And in the stomach, it's different. You
Yeah.
feel different. Okay.
Yeah, is that what you mean by it, Tibby? Is it because it is specific? It says blow out by the lips very strongly, pulling the stomach in and out.
Exactly.
Right? So it's the stomach that's doing the work, right? The passageway is out through the lips.
Yes.
What are you hearing? What's
I hear blow out by the mouth, not the lips. Entonces, people say, no.
And that's the effect you get because they've done that in pranayama.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. No. The lips.
But that could be common. I could see where again you don't realize the importance of the words, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Very important.
Yeah. So it's lips. Yeah. That's fair.
Sorry.
Yeah. That's good. No, I'm just.
Leanne.
Yes. So since we're trying to, I guess, kind of constrict, like instead of it being through the nose and it's going to be through the lips, do you want your lips to be as small as possible to, not as possible, but you know, just because you don't want it gaping open, of course, but you want it like.
I would just, when you hear the words blow up by the lips, if you hear them correctly, then you do what your body instinct tells you to do. And if it's incorrect, hopefully the teacher tells you. But a lot of this is put in very specific ways so that it's talking to something beyond the analytical mind, and we all actually know how to do it. What gets in the way for all of us, myself included sometimes, is that we've developed a different way so that part of the brain is understanding. But if you can certainly do it practically and get feedback from a teacher if it interests you to do that. But in terms of worrying about, is it this diameter or that diameter, that would be a waste of your attention. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Bikram sometimes would say, it's like blowing out candle on a cake. So how would you blow out a candle? There's no precise instruction for blowing out a candle, but we all pretty much go. So we all sort of purse our lips and blow out, and we use our abdomen to really force the air out to get a sudden blast of air to blow the candle out. So it's that kind of thing. It's the beauty of Bikram Yoga is a lot of his instructions, which are at one dimension highly specific and another dimension kind of vague, because he's not talking to the rational intellectual neocortex, he's talking to your body, and your body has a much better understanding of these subtleties and variational understanding versus the analytical brain, which can get stuck on specifics of 10 versus 9 versus 11. The body kind of goes, well, it's all the same really, because it's around about 10 kind of thing. So trust your instincts, and as you react to the words, that typically your instincts are going to be sound, and that's why teachers pay attention when maybe you've gone off on a tangent kind of thing.
It's a very good question though.
Some people will make a lot of sound. They'll go shh, shh, shh.
Yes.
What, other than, again, saying blow up by the lips, is there any other sort of correction that you like to give?
Yeah.
Bikram demonstrates it, what he wants.
I was just going to say, he doesn't talk about it. In fact, there's no dialogue for it, but he does demonstrate it. And sometimes, Michael, what I do is I just trust that the student's going to get it. I kind of
pick up the
you know what I mean, over
from
time.
others, yes.
Yeah.
That is true as well. That people
especially as a beginner, you see their cheeks puff or they're jumping up and down, but it's like, that's okay. They're trying to figure it out. That's the other thing is, I now, if it's been going on for a long time or I have a moment to say something after class, then maybe, but 9 times out of 10, I see it, I'm sure you guys too, right? I've perfected it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You start to understand it, yeah.
There is, as beginners, it's like there is really a huge value in letting them develop, as Michelle just said, letting them develop their understanding. as long as nothing terrible is going to happen, you know, it's like you can do this and that, but it's like most things, they develop their understanding by doing it again. So corrections are useful, but sometimes they're very useful in promoting the journey, and sometimes they're not needed right at that time because the person's developing their awareness.
Right. Sometimes you're taking away from whatever's going to happen for themselves, right? You're sabotaging something for them.
Yes.
No, yeah. It's a fine line, but yeah.
Michael, you had other questions.
Right, half tortoise. You had a question on half tortoise.
Yeah, with half tortoise, and it's kind of the same thing with my body. So in half tortoise, you know, keep the hips on the heels throughout the posture is up front in the dialogue. But as I go down, my hips naturally come up. And I have had the experience in other studios, even in my teacher training, some of the teachers would recommend getting your hips up because it's more important to get your forehead to the floor for that inversion. So I guess my question is really how important is creating that inversion versus keeping your hips to the heels and doing your best stretching front and back?
It's very funny. Yeah, I'd love to. So this one's a funny one because it comes up at teacher training, and Vikram will ask, gets asked about these things, and it's very funny. The first thing I would say is, what is the instruction dialogue? Hips always touching heels throughout posture. And yes, of course, in any given individual on any given day, that may not be happening, and that's fine. But that's the instruction. So there's an action there. There's an action associated with trying to manifest that truth or get that to happen. Then it also separately says, come down, touch your forehead to the floor, fingertips touch the floor, elbows locked, rest your arms in the air. So sometimes people will ask him, which is more important, keeping your hips on your heels or touching your forehead to the floor? And in wonderful educational Bikram style, he would turn it around and he'd say, who do you love more, your mother or your father? So, you know, it's one of those classic examples where the purpose of the posture is to try the right way, not to have theories about what you're trying to achieve or what result you're trying to gain from doing the posture, but to do it. So, for instance, some teachers go on and on and on about this being an inversion, which strictly speaking it's not. It's kind of sort of vaguely, but the blood flow, when he talks about blood flow to the brain, that isn't a result of you being upside down. That is a result of stretching the shoulder blades and opening up the inner shoulders and creating a relaxation effect into the neck, which increases blood flow into the brainstem. So the stretching of your arms so the elbows being locked is really crucial to that. So again, it's a thing where if a teacher is a little imprecise and say stretch forward and touch the mirror, that's not the same instruction as stretch your arms forward and try to touch the mirror. And so then sometimes you see people stretch their entire body forward and their hips come way up off their heels. And that's not the correct execution of the posture. That you'd already been told to keep your hips on your heels, which you may or may not be touching, and then you were given the instruction to lock your elbows, and you're given the instruction to stretch your arms forward and try to touch from here. And if you can do all those simultaneously, which like Hatha Yoga, everything is about an assembly of instructions which often you have to do simultaneously and they seemingly conflict, then you get what's happening in the posture is occurring. Elbows are locked, shoulder blades are moving, the muscles of the shoulder blades are waking up, all 16 muscles of the shoulder blade are starting to get better in balance, the inner shoulders are relaxing, the rhomboids are relaxing, the blood flow into the brainstem is increasing, and so it's all happening. So again, it's one of those things where overthinking it, trying to chase a result or what it looks like outcome is not the path, but going back to the basics of what were the instructions that I was given. And yes, it does seem like it's impossible to do both, but again, who do you love more, your mother or your father? And don't answer that lest you create a firestorm of differing opinions.
Michelle, do you have
But I
anything?
like what you said about that, I think a lot of teachers, studios have made it so that inversion is what actually gets the blood to your brain. But you're saying that's not really, it's more about your whole stretching and
Stretching
opening
the
up.
Yeah.
shoulder blades, scapula, channeling. Yes.
Yes.
In fact, Bikram says stretching the heart muscles.
Yeah.
That's not in the dialogue. He says it he himself, stretching the heart muscles.
Yeah.
Very important. Michelle, do you want to add anything?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like over the years, it's one of the postures that I see maybe culturally that is harder. I don't know why, but there's nothing for me to add other than I think it's a hard posture for everybody to do. I feel like everybody's arms are kind of bent. You know, we're so tight in the shoulders, right? And you know, then we just kind of dump ourselves. I think we're just so this way. You know, it's a necessary posture. And I'm agreeing with everything Matt and Sarah are saying. And you know, I can hear him saying, he said in my training too in 2001, you know, who do you love more, your brother or your sister, or your mother or your father, right? Kind of a thing. And but you know, the doing it the right way. And even in the last teacher training, he called it, you know, your energy canal, right? Like you know, you've got to keep stretching palms together, right? To have all the energy, right? You know, all the blood moving towards the brain. But you have to have active arms, right? Your arms can't just be kind of, you know, I don't see it as much. I used to see the baby fingers on the floor and the arms in the air. And I just think it's harder. It's harder because of just how we do things, right? You know, this and, you know, how we drive and all that. So, yeah, I think the effort of trying to do it the right way is the point.
Yeah, but it also
Yeah.
begins with the hips. So for you, particularly, Michael, or for somebody in a similar situation, because this relates to your other question about wind removing, which is
Yeah.
before you've even started in the setup, it said hips always touching the heels. And then it said stretch up. So now if I stretch up, I've got my arms up, but I stretch up. Now to stretch up requires a force that's pushing my hips down. It's the lengthening of the torso. These are two forces. And then exhale breathing. So now I exhale and suck my stomach in and hold the stomach in and slowly come down. Forehead touches the floor, fingertips touch the floor, elbows locked, rest your arms in the air. So that creating the space and those actions to begin with before you've even come down, and making sure you pay a bit more attention to that, like lengthening, exhaling, sucking the stomach in, holding it in. So you've created the length, which means you've created space in the spine. Now your hips are already working because you stretched up out of your waist, because we asked you to stretch up. And now if you keep that length as you come down, you'll find that you have more space. Your head may not touch the floor, you know, but you'll probably find that your head is further away beyond your knees, and you'll probably find that your head is a little bit closer to the floor, and you'll start to feel what it means to open up that part of your extension of your body. And then, you know, I have days where, particularly if I'd been a little ill or maybe eaten something weird or something, I would find for some reason in that posture it would show up as like, oh my God, I'm struggling to open up that part of my body, which for me is normally very accessible. So I would say, yes, definitely in the setup. Don't imagine that any of the setup is just sort of peripheral or just sort of filler. It all has a purpose in the physiology of the body.
That's a really good point, Matt. I'm going to just bring up another angle here, and that is the setup. You know, the setups are so crucial to maintain that setup. And, you know, Bikram has another phrase like stay with the pain. You know, sometimes I feel like, and maybe I'm making a generalization, but you're going to feel struggles a lot in the class, right? And you want to make sure that you maintain the setup, hips on the heels, stomach in, you know, stretch up, arms and head together, exhale, breathing, and you go down. I mean, it's gonna hurt. It even says your shoulders are supposed to hurt in the dialogue. Right. And and I'm saying that to myself, right? Lately, I've been a little bit more inspired for my own practice that I even feel like I've given a little bit of too much ease in my poses. And this is my own personal practice. These are things I'm reflecting on. But I think that it's too easy to kind of move into a comfort. And, you know, and it starts in the beginning. Right. You know, it's why teachers, we got to teach it right. But, you know, you've got to invite, you the pain, or, what Bikram says, right? You got to stay there, stay in it. So, Michael, all these things that you're doing before you get there, hopefully to get you there, and then, let it hurt, breathe into it, right? So,
Yeah, there's one really interesting thing that
yeah,
we're starting to notice now because
yeah,
of the age we live in. That right now, in the last few years, there have been these remarkable robots being produced. These robots have AI embedded in them, and you see videos of robots dancing or doing backflips and so on. But if you've watched some of the videos of showing the progression, like there was one of the robots that the Chinese produced recently, in January, it moved like it was stiff as a board. In February, it started to walk with some semblance of gait. By March, it was walking with some confidence. By July, it was dancing. The hardware had not changed. Not one iota of the hardware of the robot had changed. The only thing that has changed is the processing beginning to learn how to coordinate the different actuators in the robot. And so it's the same with us. So we're born, we learn to walk, and then we imagine we've learned how to use our body. Or maybe we go to school and we play catch or ball or something, and we got some hand-eye coordination, and we think we're done, we've learned how to use our body. But we are still totally learning how to tune the access to our body. Our body is very sophisticated. So when we can't do these things, it's very rarely, unless you've been in a physical trauma, or have a very unusual outlying condition, it's very typical that it's not a problem in your body. It's a not yet developed neurological mind-body connection. And so then just, having some patience and some concentration, particularly on the setups, the details and so on, and just, just patiently concentrating on it, is what opens those doors. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, I'm sorry Rajeshree's not here because I brought this up in class the other day. Claire, maybe you remember this. Matt and Sarah, I don't think it was in Thailand, and she gave a class. No, it wasn't a class. She gave a lecture. We had postures that we had to do in it, but she was talking about the initial phases. And I was reading this, and it's what you're saying, Matt, right? Where you move into the structural, the right way, and she calls it, there's an integration, right? You got your mind and your body and you're doing it the right way. And then you visit, she happened to call it a trigger point, right? Where is that point where it's like, now you're in it. Now the heat is on. Now you feel it, right? Are you backing off or will you move? And she's like, this is the moment you got to stay right in mind, right? And stay with it before you move into what she calls, that's the ease and grace, where you start to have that ease and grace but you have to move through that part right there, right? So, to go back to the words that we've tried to use before, right? It's the act of trying, right? Just trying 100% the right way and staying, Bikram calls it stay with the pain or the trigger point or that moment, right? Like that could be just the moment, Bikram also says too, right? 95% of the time we're staying in the same rhythm, right? We're staying with the same because we won't invest in that last 5%. That's the good stuff right there, right? So, that's what Bikram yoga, is doing. So, there's nothing wrong, nothing bad, but it's just, I think, Michael, you're bringing up a good point. I mean, those are the points for you. You stay with me too. I have mine.
It's something, this is only from my own practice, that, I, over the years of practicing it, I find it to be more interesting in the postures that I can't do. There's many interesting things in the other postures, but that real point of where my curiosity gets piqued, how can I make this work, is the thing that I can't do. And I'm okay with not being able to do it. And it makes every class interesting.
And I think you get to a point by doing it more and more, Sarah, where you're not in fear anymore. It goes for all of us.
Yes.
And
yes.
we become curious.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So fascinating.
So we have 6 minutes just about until the end. We always end on time as a principle, 90 minutes. Anyone got anything else that they can address in 6 minutes? Or a portion of 6 minutes?
Lynn Ann has a comment right there, if you guys want that there. Yeah. You see that in the chat?
Yeah.
Interesting.
maybe-
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah.
Yes. Yes. That's sort of, yes, that absolutely. And I think you'll, as you keep practicing, you find that for yourself. You'll notice it, how that happens. And even you don't recognize at the time that it's the minimum. You think that's the maximum, but then you're like, oh, I could do it more. And then you're like, oh, that just recently, purely by looking at the poster of Bishnu Ghosh, I started practicing with more intensity. Because I had this sort of goal to
Channeling it.
pranayama breathing like his chest. That was so everything followed from that, and lots of things came to my attention which hadn't been before. And honestly, and this is only about me, I'm not saying anyone else, but it's like I was like, what the hell was I doing before I started this? But I was doing what I knew to do. Really, I was doing what I could encompass, and I thought I was doing more and more and more, and I was. But then by doing this, it was really put everything in. That was the minimum edge, really, and it was a minimum edge just going forward a bit, but it still was. It's a really good comment. Yes.
Yeah. There's a very interesting case study we have in our own studio where we have a gentleman who's currently down in San Diego, but he would practice. It was in a wheelchair, and he literally had a bullet go through his brain and take out centers of his motor control. So he was fully disabled. He couldn't move his arms or legs. And then gradually, and got to the point where he could move a little bit, still couldn't move his legs, couldn't stand up. But he could move his arms a little bit, and he came to do the yoga, and he would sit in the room and he would do his best he could, which was quite little compared to everybody else in terms of range of motion and ability. But he would try his absolute. He would lean into everything, and sometimes for him, trying was thinking hard about trying to do it, even though the limb was physically not moving, despite his intensity of concentration on trying to get it to move. And literally, week by week, over the period of about 6 months, he reclaimed neurological control of his body. He literally grew new neural pathways through his body by his sheer determination. And the beautiful thing about him, aside from the fact that it shows that that kind of thing is absolutely real world possible, is that he wasn't focused on what he could achieve. He was focused on what he could try. It was, and he was very, very much the ideal student in that sense, because he was immersed only in the trying and not in the outcome or the result. And it was quite remarkable to behold. And I hope that it sort of reminds us all that that's really where the yoga takes place. Not just the physical yoga, but the mental yoga, the spiritual yoga. It's not about how expert you are at executing a posture, because that's gymnastics at some level, but it is about the state of the mind as you engage and try very, very hard to do things the right way as best you can, given where you're at right now, dealing with whatever you're dealing with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you reminded me of Emmy Cleaves, right? And that's another class, right? We should just talk about someone who reinforces. This is a woman who probably, out of anybody in the world, it was a teacher to Bikram. In ways, right? 50 years or so doing this yoga practice, and I feel like one of her major words was intensity. She wanted you, encouraged you to really don't underestimate, work with intensity. And this is kind of what you're saying too. But that's exactly, Nolan, what you're saying. And on an end note, I maybe Matt and Sarah, you guys have seen this. I saw him in a picture where he was actually standing barbecuing.
My goodness!
Yes,
wow,
yes.
we look at that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Right? Isn't that amazing? Right, you guys? There's a Facebook page where he's
cell by cell, literally.
Yeah, right.
Very cool.
Yeah.
As we get towards the end, I actually want to say these discussions are always really good. I think this is one of the richest and most interesting that we've had, honestly. It's we've covered an awful lot. Thank you for all participating with your excellent questions. And the discussion continues at any time. Really, thank you. I've enjoyed this immensely and really found myself having to dig deep into my knowledge and learn. So thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we'll post a link to Bikram's
class on
YouTube as a follow-up to this to let you all know. And don't forget this is recorded. Give it a week or so for us to collect it and format it, but it will get posted onto our YouTube library. So all the old Q&As are there as well.
But you're going to send out the Bikram video, though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Class. Okay. Yeah, you said that. Okay. Thanks, you guys. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Matthew,
Bye then. Be well.
Thank you so much, you guys, for joining in. Bye. See you in class.
Yeah.